We are now recording.
Hello, hello. All right, so thank you all very much for coming. This is going to be layout take 2 because take 1 didn't happen. I got sick and don't really know what it was, but I wasn't feeling 100% until about Tuesday. So again, thank you all for sticking it out and coming this week instead of what it was supposed to be for last week. This is a basic class on layout for what we do in the SCA in scribing. There are a lot of ways to do layout. Some of them are more advanced, some of them are less advanced. This is bare bones. We're using Unshul, so we're not going to be using some of the fancier forms of doing layout. We're not going to be talking about the golden ratio. We're not going to be talking about how do you draw out the diagrams using that. We're just going to talk about basic layout. Now you'll notice I have a lot of different toys with me today. This is called a rolling ruler. You can call it a bunch of other things. Occasionally you will hear somebody curse at it and call it different names. The neat thing about these is that they are ruled. So you have inches here, centimeters down here, and there are holes in it so that you can just push this along and draw a line. And you can also just use it like a regular ruler you might do. But if you want to get certain marks at certain distances, then you can they also have rules here. It doesn't look like it's focusing. So let me see if I can get it to. Wrong button. Well, bring it up. And you can kind of see that there are ruling marks here as well. And that'll tell you exactly what distance that you're moving at. We also have here a protractor so that you can figure out what you want to do with that. You can actually stick something here and then move this so that you're getting a line or a circle that way. These are actually not my favorite tool. I kind of avoid them. But there are a lot of people out there that absolutely love them and they think that they are fantastic and wonderful for what they do for doing layout. And I will be the last person to tell you not to use it. They do work. I just don't like them. Let me see if I can find a. There it is. That's better. So T-square, on the other hand, in my personal opinion, is pretty much a requirement. Doesn't matter what kind of T-square you're going to get, but get one that will work for the paper or the writing surface that you're going to be working on. This is a 12-inch T-square. I think it cost me $5. You can order them online from a variety of different places. The thing about these the thing is that this is a little short. It'll work on this one. But if you start using a 14-inch sheet of paper, which is pretty common in the SCA for doing scrolls, you're going to come up a little shy in this direction. Nothing necessarily wrong with that. The solution to that, by the way, is if you can't reach it, that's okay. You just turn the square around and you're fine. You can now draw from this line or this direction. Scrolls typically are done in a portrait. Occasionally we do go to landscape, but portrait does tend to be where we work the most. So as you probably have guessed, this is a 9x12 sheet of paper, one of the smaller ones that's out there. I highly recommend that you go ahead and just practice on regular computer paper. 8.5x11 is fine, and just get used to it. Now, a lot of people will ask, well, what should I draw if I'm going to be doing my layout? A, how should I do it? And B, what should I use? If you're doing practice layout, I highly recommend anything you want that you can see. And by anything, I really do mean anything. This is a carpenter's pencil. It does red. This is the black carpenter's pencil. I have all sorts of different pens or different kinds of mechanical pencils, colored pens, blue, red, yellow, you name it. All of these can help you with your layout. And really it just comes down to what works for you. Now, the thing that we don't like to talk about, or that we kind of ignore when we talk about it is, well, okay, we're doing layout. We're going to try and figure out what we want to do and how we want to do it. We're not going to do it right the first time. We might want to make modifications. Maybe we did do it right and just decided, yeah, that's not what I want. Have an eraser. Now, in this case, this is an eraser, as you can probably tell, has been used a lot by me. It is this eraser is the remnants of my favorite kind of eraser. It's a Moo eraser, M-O-O, Moo, and pretty much available at any art supply store or and most art supply aisles at most stores, but not always. The close second is a kneaded rubber eraser, and so they work really, really well too. For today's class, I'm actually going to use this pencil, not because I like using it for layout, but because it'll make a nice dark line that you all can see. Typically, I much prefer this pencil. This, for those people who are not familiar with it, is a drafting pencil. It's like a mechanical pencil. Mechanical pencils, typically you click the top and out comes the graphite. Push the button down and it'll go back in. Well, this doesn't do that. What this does is it has little grippers on the end, as you can kind of see, and that there is a long piece of graphite that's in it, and it is gravity fed. So if it's like this, and I can put, and it'll just drop right back in. If I push it out, it'll drop right out. These guys sharpen in a rotary sharpener. This is an older version. Drop it in, go until it gets nice and sharp. 10, 15, it's already been sharpened. If you're using a blunt, it can take a whole lot more rotations than that. You can pick up a plastic one of these for about $7. They kind of look like a toy trash can. This is a really wonderful tool. And the reason for that is that the graphites that are here will actually tell you how hard they are. They go from H's to HB to, I think it's B now. It's been a while since I learned these, and then they changed the system on me. Basically, it's hardness and softness. Anything that's hard is going to make a thinner, lighter line. Anything that is soft, which is the B's, is going to make a darker, thicker line. A number 2 pencil is what I think they call a 2HB these days. And if that's wrong, feel free to correct me on that. I don't want to give out bad information. I much prefer hard pencils when I'm doing my own layout because they draw out lines that are easier to erase if I'm going to erase lines. That, by the way, it's also a discussion. If you're going to draw lines for you to write on, should you leave them in or take them out? The period thing to do in most cases is leave them in. But our modern eye, we tend to prefer to take them out. Whatever works, just be aware of the choices that you're making, and so that if somebody asks, you can explain them and why you made the choice that you made. It's a lot of information, and we haven't even put anything down on paper yet. All right, so typically speaking, in the SCA, if we're going to make an original scroll, we think that the recipient might or probably will get it framed. And so this class is from that perspective. If that's what's going on, we want to be able to let this person put a mat on it so that it's a frame inside of a frame. And so we want to give them at least 1 inch. Mats can be up to 2 inches, but we want to give them at least 1 inch just for the matting. And so go ahead and mark 1 inch. You can come over here, and if you'll notice that my 9 inch is over here and the paper's over here. So I'm actually off by a little bit. For the purposes of this class, I'll just go ahead and mark the 8 because that's what's visible. But I would actually, for the purposes of when I'm doing this, I would actually move it over by 1/16 of an inch because that's how much this is off by. Now I'm going to do that same exact thing in the other way. Now, since I am here, I might as well draw this in. Now, there's 2 ways you can go about drawing this in. You can move this here and then put your pencil down, or you can put your pencil down on the mark you made and then move the T-square to it. Now, when you draw your line, you're going to make it, it's going to hide that mark a little bit better. I said better, I didn't say perfectly. But it also means you're going to get the space that you wanted. So I move that up, come down here, and yeah, I can use the bottom of the T-square just as easily as I can use the top of the T-square. And I draw that one. Flip it back up to portrait, and then I draw those in. Now, there is often discussion that happens. Well, should I draw this line all the way across, or should I only draw it for the areas that I'm going to be in? Whichever you want. I don't see a reason most of the time to draw that line and stop just inside this area where the box is. There are times where you want to do that, by the way, but for this one, no real reason. If you want to, do what you think is going to be best for you. All right. So now I have a place that I can write and we can color and we can paint in and we can do all the fun things, right? No, not yet. Besides not having given us lines to draw on, I don't know what I'm going to do with this yet. Or we haven't figured that out yet anyway. All right, so now I have a 1-inch area on all sides of my paper. And that means that if I had a 9 by 12, I now have a 7 by 10 writing area. All right. So this over here is 10 inches. This up here is now 7 inches. So I just shrank my square inches by a lot. And now I'm going to shrink it even more because I need to have some kind of space so that I'm not writing all the way up to the edge of that thing or painting all the way up to that edge necessarily. In other words, I got to figure out where my text is going to go, and I got to figure out where my decoration, illumination, miniatures are going to go as well. So when we're doing decoration, when we're doing layout for Unschul or pre-1300s, it's a lot of choices that we can make and do what we want. I haven't found that there is a pattern to how they do that. Hello, ant. Yes, it's been raining here, so the ants come up here looking for food. You'll notice I didn't find any. So do we want to do a capital? Do you want to do a painted capital? Usually that's going to be up here. Do we want to do a border inside this? Do I want to turn this into 2 columns? Well, if I do want to turn this into 2 columns, do I want to do it here, this way? Or do I want to fold it this way and have 2 columns across here? These are the different kinds of questions that that you need to think about, and then how you want to do it. There are some really gorgeous scrolls that I've seen that are out there that do use the column method. They do it this way. They do columns on this side, columns on this side, and they have a beautiful miniature painting drawing right here. And they have a capital over here and a capital up here. And those are choices you can make, and it can kind of get a little complicated. We're going to keep things a little bit simple. And we're going to go ahead and give ourselves another 1 inch inside of this so that we can paint, we can have a little bit of buffer.
Ian, can I just make a comment?
Please.
If you're doing the calligraphy, but not necessarily the artwork, this is the discussion that the 2 of you would have together. Because if you go ahead and make any assumptions as to what the illuminator wants to do, you could run into difficulties. Like if you're doing if you're doing a team project, so Ontier, for example, is just about to do its 3rd Scribble 48-hour challenge. They're working in teams. So this is a process that would be discussed within the team.
Yep. And that conversation will include things like, well, what time period are we going off of? Where are we working it off of? What style do we want to use? And from that, then you're going to make the determinations of, what kind of capitals are you going to use? Are you going to do gilding, that kind of things? For our purposes, again, we're going to keep it pretty simple.
You also, Ian, need to leave space for signatures and for seals.
Yep. So we're going to go ahead and toss that 1 inch in again. Turn it, do the 1 inch. One inch. Now this one, maybe you do want to try and keep it inside the box, but hey, erasers are a thing, so I'm not going to worry about it. I am going to stay inside this box. Just so we can kind of see the areas that we're working inside of. And see which area we're focused on. All right, so this one is 7 inches. This one is 10 inches, and I just knocked off 2 inches again on each side. Now, all of a sudden, that's 5 inches, and this is 8 inches. I just
Can I
took,
say a couple words about mats?
please.
The College of Scribes of Anstura were encouraged to work with standard mat sizes. So for that size of the paper, I would use an 8 by 10 photo mat, which has an opening size of 7.5 by 9.5 inches. This guarantees that the recipient doesn't need to get a custom mat when they frame it.
Yep.
And that saves them money, which I'm sure they appreciate. So at least for some of us, we always start with the mat. We aim for the person to use with the artwork.
At which point in time, it's very easy. You buy yourself that mat, you stick it down on your piece of paper, and you trace out the inside, and you don't have to worry about the rest of the stuff that I put in. And I actually have a standard mat size thing that I use that I can put on the group if I just got to remember where I put it. So yeah, so now we have 5 inches by 8 inches in this case. And the reason for this is that the reason I show this is that you have what I call the ever shrinking paper. Okay, I had a lot of space. Now all of a sudden I don't. And it's really easy to think bigger than you should. So yeah, get your parameters of what your space is going to be, and then start doing that. Now let's say that that there was going to be a 2 inch by 2 inch capital. All right, that's not unusual, but in this case, all of a sudden that's pretty big. I mean, that's to here. To here. So if I do 2 inches by 2 inches, I just took up an awful lot of space, and that doesn't quite look right. Maybe that's just too big. Maybe we should just do 1 inch. And you can see that this process, I kind of already knew that 2 inches was going to be too much. But 2 inches doesn't sound like very much, does it? Sounds like a small amount of space. It's not. And that is roughly a 1 inch by 1 inch. And all of a sudden my space opens up and I have more room to do stuff with it. And that's why you do layout ahead of time, is to figure these things out. So now I have a 1 inch space for my capital, and it's an uncial one. So we're going to go ahead and make that an A just because we can. And the nice thing about just the layout and getting it worked out is it doesn't need to be particularly pretty. It just needs to be something that'll work for you. So now, how much space do I actually have for my text block if I don't do any other decoration, illumination, or anything else like that? Well, I have 5 inches by 8 inches. Well, that's 40 inches. But I just took an inch out. So now I have 39 inches, square inches for text block. Yes, I'm sorry, we do math. But we don't have to do a lot of it, and it's usually pretty simple. So now, what I want to write is going to be, has to fit in with 39 square inches, except I don't have 39 square inches because, as was brought up, I need to leave room for the signatures. And it doesn't matter if their majesties write their own signatures or their excellencies write their own signatures or whoever it is that's doing the signatures, or if a scribe will do that for them, the room still needs to be there. I typically like to leave the bottom third. This is a personal choice, not a requirement. I personally like to leave about the bottom third for those signatures. Do they need to be? No. You could put it in as just 1 inch. In this case, I'm going to make it 2 inches, so it's going to be a quarter. A quarter's close enough to a third. And if I don't like that later, I can change it in the layout. That's fine.
Ian, often that's determined by the size of the seal.
Yes, or if the seal is going to get used, or if it's going to be a hanging seal or a stamp. Yeah. Find out what your kingdom has so that you can make it as it works. There are, in the Middle Kingdom, all the scrolls there are originals in some form or another, either that was painted originally and then somebody else did the calligraphy originally, or the whole thing was done originally by one person. You can get a hold of the signet and ask, and they'll actually ask if you mind if they put the and you can write on the back of your scroll, go ahead and put the seal over my writing. You know, and some kingdoms will do that. Some kingdoms will never do that, and some kingdom will do it, but the crown doesn't want to do that. So yeah, make sure that we're doing, if this is going to be a four-court scroll, that you work to the court that you are working for, be it landed barony, principality, landed principality, or their majesties. And so when I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do for layout, and I've done that, I'm going to tell myself why I did that. So I'm going to write in here SIGs. You can write signatures if you want. You can even draw in the lines as a way to help remind you. Typically speaking, consort is on the right, and the person who won crown term is on the left, typically. That said, there are some kingdoms where that will change, like in the Middle Kingdom, if it is an award for arts and sciences, the consort signature goes on the left, and the consort gets actually mentioned first. Every kingdom is different, so make sure that you are reading, paying attention to, and are getting inserted into the Scribal community and read the Scribal handbook. It's easy to jump around because there's just so many different things that we could be doing.
And in some cases, Ian, if it's a landscape layout for the charter and they're using columns, then the signatures can be one above the other because of the spacing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so because there's so many variations, it's why I'm like, no, this is a basis class, people. What we're showing you today is the basics, and what is possible is so much more. So I don't want anybody to feel like, oh, this is what they showed us and that's all we can do. No, and certainly, and this is all that's out there. No, there's a lot out there that's possible to do.
Generally, it's recommended that if you're doing scrolls or charter designs for a particular branch, whether that's a barony or a canton or whatever, that you check with the baronial scribe to find out what their specifications are, because they will have, normally, they will have a guide sheet for their scrolls. Same with principalities and kingdoms.
And if they don't have one, well, the officer that is in charge of that at the very least is your herald. Of if you have a herald, depending on your group, you should. It's one of their more required offices. And if they don't have an answer, they should say, well, hang on, let me go check. And they'll talk to the people that they should. And if they want to have requirements, they'll let you know what they are. And if they don't, they'll come back and go, no, do whatever you want.
But never assume that because they say, no, we don't have a guide sheet, that you're free to do whatever you want. You need to actually ask specific questions, like what are the requirements around signature lines, etc. So you need to understand the foundational layout concept so that you know which questions to ask if they can't provide you with a guide sheet.
Yep, and that's what this class is more or less about, is kind of getting you general stuff so that you have a good idea. And then if things aren't being shown, that you can ask questions to get to the answers that you need to be able to do the job you want to do. All right. So I just took off 2 inches by 5 inches. So I just lost 10 inches. And so my 40 inches is now 30 inches minus 1 inch. I'm at 29 inches for my calligraphy, assuming that that's enough room for my signatures. Again, it's just, these are generalities. So at this point in time, you can draw in the lines here, or you can go to a regular piece of paper that you've printed stuff out on and draw in a 29-inch block, or trace over this area that you're drawing on, and now you can do your calligraphy here. When you get done with that, if you really want, you can cut it up and play games down here of puzzle, putting it together, especially if you've changed around your layout. If you are in a kingdom that uses wow, my vocabulary is not working today. Where people have already painted on it and then you're left to do the calligraphy, and you don't want to start practicing calligraphy on this pre-paint scroll blank. Thank you. That's what it was. Scroll blank. Then yeah, absolutely. Get a regular piece of paper, trace it out, and then write with it, or measure it out, put it on here, and then you can kind of play your puzzle games with it. There's a lot of different ways to play with it when somebody else has dictated the layout for you. If you're able to do collaborations, it's much, and talk with the people and collaborating, it's much more fun for you.
Light boxes are also useful.
Incredibly useful. My light box I've had for 13 13 years now. And it gets pulled out pretty often when I'm working on and doing scribal work. So this is where knowing your pen size becomes important. I now have 29 inches to work with. Well, that pen size and this pen size are going to get me completely different amounts of writing done. This one is smaller. I can do more writing with it. This one is bigger. Maybe I want to do my capitals with it, or maybe I don't want to use it at all. By the way, this is the pen that I lost about, I don't know, what was it, 2 or 3 weeks ago? I found it 2 days ago, finally. So trying to read which size this is. It's a Mitchell 2. So once I know what size that is, I need to know what my X height's going to be. Am I using 4? Am I using 5? Am I using 3? With Unchel, because that's the theme we're sticking with here is Unchel. It should be about 4. And then whatever your pen size is. Now, I am arbitrarily going to say that my X height is 5 millimeters. All of a sudden, I'm not using English anymore, English measurements or American imperial measurements. I'm switching over to metric. And the reason for that is that my pen nibs are almost all in metric. Without getting into using a line guide, it's just kind of easiest to get outside the text block, figure out where your millimeter measurements are going to be, and then quickly make those marks. Now, I am not going to make you all watch while I draw out every single line, but I do want to show you how interacting with the capitals can be a bit of a pain. When you're going to be doing your writing, there's always a question of, do you write on this top line or do you use it as a space? And the answer is, what do you want to do? What are you supposed to be doing? Because what are you supposed to be doing will help answer a lot of the questions. Are you supposed to be doing a period recreation of something? Well, if you are, go look what they did. Are you just doing something inspired? Well, go look what they did and see if it's going to work for you. But typically speaking, I will tell you, aesthetically, to the modern eye, it is better if this line is not used as your X line to write on. Now, we got a little lucky with this one. And I'll stop drawing here in about one more line. Sometimes you do get lucky. Sometimes this bottom part of the line works out almost perfectly with a line here. But what happens if it's here? You can't get a full line out of that, can you? Well, you can work it so that you skip this line and it becomes a non-issue, because you do get to choose what lines you write on and what lines you don't, at least with Unchel. Or you act like it starts over here. Don't try and squish things. It doesn't work. And I will tell you, it is actually better to skip this line, because if your letters need to have an ascender, you're going to go into this block here for your capital. They tended to avoid that, but it depends. So again, do what is going to work for you aesthetically, but also do what you're supposed to be working toward. So this is to give names to things. This is the head of the paper or header. This is the foot or footer. Starting to sound like terms that we see regularly when we're trying to figure out, you know, our margins on a document, on a digital document. Yeah, those terms have been around forever. Okay, not forever, but they've been around a long time. Certainly predating digital. Okay, we have our margin. Margins are not just what's on the left and the right, but also above and below. This is the capital or capital block, text block. The margin that is here can also be for decoration. And so if you put decoration in it, it's a decoration margin. I know that there's another technical term for it, but all of a sudden I'm blanking on it. And this area is your signature block. And that's pretty straightforward at this point. So, do we have any questions or anything people specifically would like to see?
So Ian, can I make one other suggestion at this point?
Please.
So I would be inclined to go to the beside the capital there on to the right of the capital. And I would actually be inclined to put a small X in the first line that I was going to write on. Because I can write over the X because it's going to be in pencil. And the reason for that is that like in Uncial, we know, for example, that we write on a line, we skip a line, and then we write on the next line, correct? Yeah.
I recommend we skip 2 lines, but yes.
Okay, that's fine, whichever you prefer. But yes, because you're allowing for the descenders and the ascenders, correct?
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. So it's always a good idea when you're doing something like this to put the X's in on the lines that you're going to write on, because there's nothing worse than getting halfway through and making the mistake of not leaving that space, because it'll throw the visual of the calligraphy off. So if you always mark your right lines, we use the X traditionally because we refer to the X height, and that's just synonymous with the 2. But that way you can clearly see how much. So when going back to what Ian said, when he said he had 29 square inches, you actually only have a third of that to write on.
Yeah. You have 29 square inches of text block. You do not have 29 inches of text.
No.
And Uncial is this gorgeous, beautiful way of writing, and I absolutely love it. But yeah, it uses up a lot of space to get that. And so you can actually go, oh, look, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 lines to write with. No, I have 4. And that really, when you first realize that, if you weren't thinking about it before and you first sit down and you do that, you're like, oh, I really have to be careful with what I'm writing. Which, by the way, is why things like Gothic came around. Well, they're much more, stuck together, and well, you can put more text on the same amount of area.
They're compressed.
Yeah, that's the word I was looking for. Ants are bugging me. Sorry about that, people.
Yeah.
So, yep. Yeah, I didn't know the X was what was standard. My thing is I use a dash, but use something to indicate, people.
The reason that I don't recommend the dash is that it can be mistaken for a mark.
Yep.
The X is very clear. That this is a line that this is your X height line that you do your the main body of your writing on.
Yep, absolutely.
Ian, I just wanted to let you know we're going on 40 minutes.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So when you're all doing this, you noticed I was working using my gloves. And yeah, when Taliesin mentioned it, I went ahead and put them on. So I usually have a demonstration of what he was talking about. But I put them on when I'm doing the layout. And I do this so that every time I do layout, I have my gloves on. That way, when I go to my project layout, I have my gloves on. I don't make the mistake of, oh, I'm used to working without my gloves. I'll be fine. And then I wipe my hand on there, or I get my fingertips on there. And now I have oil that I can't see that I've smeared onto my writing area. So when you're working and you're doing your layout, even if it's practice layout, like something like this, you put your protector down so that your hand does not, so you have that habit of always doing that before you sit down and do your layout. Back in my, oh, look, I've been a scribe for a while and I know what I'm doing and I don't need to be as absolutely careful every time. So, when I was kind of what I thought was a moderate scribe at the time, yeah, I started making these mistakes and I suffered for it. And the answer is just don't get that kind of comfortable. There's good things to get comfortable about. But when it comes to keeping your work area clean and able to be worked in that you're going to be writing on, don't just every time in your practice or in your final projects, be fastidious, for lack of a better way of saying it. And
There's
so,
another trick I can share about line drawing. Ian, by any chance, do you have a Post-it note?
yeah, get several.
I just need you to use a very small one. Very small one.
Certainly. Do I have the teeny tiny ones? I do.
Oh, that's too small. Sorry.
That's okay.
I was thinking of the little 1x1, but anyway.
Yeah, I don't have the 1x1s, but that's okay.
Fine.
Not a
But
problem.
we can use
scribes here.
Yeah. But we can use your little one. It'll work just the same. You didn't have to rip that. Just take one, and you're going to line it up to the top, the first line. Your first line in your text block. Take the top of the Post-it note, line it up with the line on your thing.
That one?
No, on your text
block.
Yeah. Okay, so if you've lined it up,
is that
perfect.
the X height one?
It doesn't matter. You've
okay.
Literally what you can do is you can on the left hand, it doesn't matter the left or the right, do it on the right. Just put a mark where your lines are underneath it. Yeah. Now you can lift your Post-it note up, put it on the last line you drew in your text box on the left hand side.
Oh.
No. Go to the left side under the capital, the last line you drew on your text box, which is below your thumb. So move over to your right so that you're right on the corner of your text block. Okay, there's fine, that's fine. You don't have to measure at this point. Using your T-square, you can line up to those marks and just simply add your lines. Once you've measured your first 3 or 4, you can use a Post-it note as a line guide and your T-square to draw additional lines in as you need them.
Where's my T-square? I buried my T-square. That's a neat trick.
You're less likely to get frustrated with line drawing that way. If you have to
and you're
measure,
more likely to keep it even.
Yes. So you can see why if you put your Post-it note in your margin this time, if you'd have put your Post-it note in your margin lined up that way, you can actually draw your line all the way across.
Yeah. That's sweet.
Okay.
Never even heard of that one.
That's 53, no. Yeah, 53 years of calligraphy behind that.
He told us. That's nice. I love that. I will probably end up using
It's
that.
just one of those little quick tricks that you use
Yeah.
so that you do not have to measure out every single line. Because once you get the first couple of them measured, then you can make a template and use it all the way down.
Yep. So one of the things that they did in period to make sure that they hit that every time is they actually used an implement that had two sharp points on it. And it's very much like a compass, and all of a sudden I can't remember the name of it. But instead of having a drawing end and a pointed end, it was two pointed ends, and they just leave it there and they walk it down the side and they poke it. And then they would either take the back of their penknife and draw the line in that way, or they would have a tool to press it, and they would press them in, or they would use a quill pen, usually with a special ink for it, often a red ink, but not always, and draw it across. And to do that, they had a beveled edge, and they would make sure that the bevel was up, and that way the ink wouldn't seep under it, and when you and you wouldn't get a messiness when you were doing that.
So it's called scoring.
Yep.
When you
It probably won't show up well, but will it show up at all? There it is.
yeah.
And it works. It's beautiful. And it's a bit of a pain to write on, but it was also very, very common. And the reason this is a bit of a pain to write on is that it's an indentation in the paper that you were trying to write with a flat object to draw your letters. And so you hit that indentation and you have to be very careful. But yeah, it's a fun thing to do either way. And so, you know, you'll see the pictures where they're writing here and they're using their pen to hold things while they're writing. But that pen was more than just something to hold. It was more than I'm going to scrape off my mistakes. It was used for a lot of things. And that includes scoring your paper.
So Ian, we got 14 minutes left before we're at an hour of recording, just letting you know.
Yeah, and we're at the 4 o'clock mark, which is when we normally stop anyway. So unless people actually have a question, I'm going to leave it at this, and I look forward to seeing people's layout stuff, but I expect that we have some questions that have gone unanswered as I see 7 comments in chat.
Just a quick, really simple, dumb question. I've heard you guys mention
dumb.
originals. I've heard you mention original scrolls a lot, and I guess there's a distinction between an original scroll and a not original scroll.
So
There are,
and on tier, we use charters for awards, except for peerages and higher levels. So
hey, go ahead.
they're pre-printed scrolls, and then we send them out to illuminators to be painted and decorated. So they're designed originally much like a scroll would do, but then we take an image of them and print multiple copies. So in on tier, for example, for things like our AOAs, our Goutte de Sangs, our I can't remember, Jean de Leon, which is our ANS one, those are when they're presented, they are charters. They're not original scrolls. We stopped doing that a number of years ago.
And I guess a charter here is, I guess, a slightly different usage than I'm familiar with. So that's synonymous with those pre-printed scrolls.
Mm-hmm. In on tier it is.
Unfortunately, we're pretty much the same way. And basically, another way to look at it is that the calligraphy was already done. And so a copy of that on high quality paper, in theory, is made usually at a professional printer. The illumination itself is an outline, at least here in Onstiora.
Yes.
And then the illuminator or the miniature painter will go over and paint it however they want, but inside the lines in that pattern that's already there.
Mhm.
And I don't mean this in a demeaning way. The easiest way to think about that is if you think about a coloring book that has the lines, that's the kind of thing, except it's a period kind of illumination and drawing. That's an easy way to think about it.
And
Okay,
other than
yep.
that, they're prepared the same way in Ontier. We do not, we ensure that our illuminators that are doing these charters are using gouache or period paint. They're not allowed to use watercolors, that sort of thing. So everything else is kept to the same standard. It's just that we have, every time a king and queen or a prince and princess gain the throne, their coronet scribe or their royal scribe calls out for charter designs, and everything is, the images are all put together. And so there will be a half a dozen images for each of the lower awards.
Okay, I understand now. Thank you.
But Pierre, going back to your question on the chat about one by one really chews up a lot of real estate, went from 9 by 12 down to 5 by 8. That goes again to the, that's why layout is so important, so that you don't run into issues with projects like you're working on, where you're doing an original piece, and you ensure that there is room for everything on that page, because it's really not as much room as we think it is.
It is never the amount of room of the paper of the surface that you're going to be working on, paper, parchment, glass window, whatever it is. You're always going to have less.
Mm-hmm. And that's important to figure out for another reason. I don't know what other kingdoms do, but in Ontier, for example, we put calls out to what we call wordsmiths. So they submit the language for the award. And that's again with their lower awards. It's really a good idea to let them know the approximate space on the charter that that's going to be. I've literally had wordsmiths submit to me 500 words.
Oh God.
And then had to go back to them and said, I really need you to cut this down to 75 to 100 words, because we only have this much space.
To let you know, on average, a lot of words for a court scroll is 200.
Mm-hmm.
The average is going to be, like you said, about 75 to 100.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of space. There's a lot of things that need to be covered if you get to wordsmith your own scrolls. And that is, you need to cover the introduction, hello, its titulation, you know, their majesties of, and the name of their majesties, however is appropriate in your kingdom. Then you need to say what you're doing. We're going to be giving somebody an award. You need to name the award. You need to put the recipient's name in it. And depending on the kingdom, you probably should write something nice about what it was that they did, so they for getting the award.
And the other thing is that many of the branches, be that baronies, cantons, or principalities or kingdom, have specific requirements as to certain words or phrases that need to be included in the wordsmithing. Yep. So that will address things like how His Majesty or Her Majesty is to be addressed formally. That will be things like the name of the kingdom. That will be things like whether Annus Societatis can be abbreviated or must be spelled out in full. And the order to which the date will be listed. Is it going to be the day of this month in the year of Annus Societatis? However you say that word. I can never pronounce it.
Yeah.
But it really can be. It's again why in my own work I encourage the branches that I'm dealing with to sit down and work out their scroll and charter guides, so that that's documented. So they don't have to reinvent the wheel every 6 months when new people step up to the throne.
So
And that's-
Ian, this is Richard. I just wanted to say, I really enjoyed this particular class. It answered a lot of questions that I didn't even know how to ask yet.
Yeah, yeah, it's an important thing. And
It
this,
is. It really
and this
is.
class is going to set us up going forward for everything else we do.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yeah, Pierre agrees. He's put that in the chat. So yeah, this and Taliesin, thank you for the cheat you showed Ian to do. That's going to help me immensely. So thank you.
Yeah, 15, well, more than that years in. I think I'm 16 years in doing SCH Scribble, and that's the first time I've seen it. It's nice to see something new. I love being around Scribble people and doing these things together. In Onstiora, for those of us that are in Onstiora, we have, you will write it this way. You will only write it this way. This is the only wording that you will use. And that is for, and then every scroll has that laid out. And that's the way it is. You can get permission, but you must ask permission to step outside of the required text.
Okay, so I'm going to stop recording.